in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and it was looking at a very little-known episode in the history of our people. We were the instrumental factor in bringing Manitoba into Canada as part of the Canadian Capitalist Confederation, and that incident historically was followed by a genocidal campaign of murder and violence against the Métis. I was particularly proud of it, not because it was revealing something new, but it was bringing to the attention of a lot of people one of the most shameful stories of how capitalism was built in the northern half of Turtle Island. And I love being able to help people understand the reality of the country that we live in.
Okay. So our next question comes from E2D2, and he asks, what significant events have pushed you towards running for the head of British Columbia's Communist Party?
Well, I've been a political organizer before I became the editor of our newspaper. I was the party's leader in Saskatchewan for about a decade during the 1980s, for example. Then I moved into the journalism area. After I retired, we've made some changes in terms of our party structure here in British Columbia, and we're at a moment when there's a lot of young people who've joined our party, with a lot of really excellent skills and ideas and smarts and a lot more energy than I have, but not necessarily the experience. So right at this particular moment, I'm stepping into a new role, which is to become our British Columbia leader, which will be for, not for a long period of time, I don't think. But it's a way for me to work with people who I really admire, who are 30, 40, 45 years younger than me, and they have a lot of great stuff to bring to the movement. And I'm really excited about working with people of that generation.
Okay. Next question comes from Yeticus, and he asks, are you pro-Kanzuk? Kanzuk, the recent trading deal between Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia.
Oh, generally speaking, we're opposed to capitalist trade deals. We see these as instruments to help transnational capital, the big corporations, have an easier time of transferring capital investments around the world. Very rarely do they contain anything positive for working people. And these particular, the deals that bring together the countries of the main imperialist English-speaking powers, these are, maybe it's sort of crude to say they give us the creeps, but this is a tool of white supremacist global domination, these kinds of deals, and we are opposed to them. We would much rather see one-on-one bilateral trade deals with a wider range of countries. Canada, for example, could probably benefit a lot by an increased trading partnership with China. We've been against these big trade deals ever since they came up back during the 1980s. We've campaigned against all of them.
Okay. And on that question, do you believe China to be a proletarian state?
We believe China is a country which is in the process of attempting to build socialism. There's a lot of contradictions involved in that. They have a very large capitalist class, obviously, and also an enormous working class, an enormous proletariat, and other sections of the population. Will they get to socialism? We certainly hope so, because I'm not sure there's much hope for the future of this planet if China and other countries don't move in a socialist direction. Over the last 20, 30 years, something like 600 million people in China have been lifted out of extreme poverty. They have much improved living standards. There's issues that China is tackling that we wish we were tackling here. Things like the expansion of renewable energy, China is a country which does believe in international cooperation to tackle the big issues facing the human race today. The balance of forces in China is complicated. At the moment, the leadership of China is held by the Communist Party of that country. They have socialism as their defined goal. They have Marxism as their defining political philosophy. They're teaching people Marxism on a bigger scale than they were for many years. So in our view, this is moving in a positive direction, but there's no guarantees whether they will get to socialism on the timeline that they're looking at, which is to achieve it within the next 25, 30 years. I hope so.
Okay, excellent. Our next question, kind of a simple one, comes from Fatty, and he asks, what person has influenced you the most?
Wow. I would say it's somebody none of your listeners here have ever heard of, a guy by the name of William Twomey, who was the leader of the Communist Party in Alberta when I joined the party back in 1972. He was a guy from a radical Finnish community background, grassroots community organizer, came out of the farming community in Alberta. He was a very solid, straightforward, proletarian kind of guy who cared nothing for money or, votes or political success in the way that many people would think of it. He wanted to help win a better world, and he acted in a way that for young people like myself who were joining at that time, he showed how to work collectively. He gave us the free rein to act on ideas that he might have thought were a bit wacky, but he supported us. And I've always, when I'm in a difficult situation, I stop and think, what would Bill have done? What would Bill have said in this situation to help make things better instead of worse? So, that's just a very personal example from my own life. Of course, other, the big name communist leaders, we all have our favorites. But, I never knew any of those people, so.
Oh, so keeping quite close to your roots then.
I try.
Our next question comes from Office Max, and she asks, what do you think about the concept of leftist unity, and do you find it to be necessary?
I'm a very practical person in many ways. I've been in movements where we were able to build unity of left organizations of one kind or another and make some important achievements. So yes, I do think it's important. Here in Vancouver, where I've lived the last 27 years, we've had a civic municipal reform organization, which included the Communist Party, the NDP, the trade unions, other left groups, and we've many times elected people to city councils and school boards, and it was a very concrete example of how you can build unity around struggles for reforms, electoral struggles at the local level. So yes, I think it's possible and necessary. It's sometimes really difficult to find partners to build unity with. Here in Canada, there are a few organizations which define ourselves as revolutionary, Marxist, and we have agreements on long-term goals, the kind of future society we want to build. But often there's serious difficulties in figuring out how to cooperate around immediate issues, and that can be a real stumbling block in terms of trying to build left unity on a bigger scale. And the fact of the matter is, these organizations, including ours, are very small. So yes, it would help to unite them in various ways, but that's not an easy thing to do in a country the size of ours when we're talking, such tiny numbers of people. Will that situation change? I think so. As people move towards socialist thinking, there will be larger numbers of members of left organizations, and perhaps more of these organizations. And where it's possible, we'll have to find ways to work together. We often work together to the best of our ability in the anti-war movement, for example, because there's no big party in Canada that is opposed to imperialist wars. So it's up to left-wing organizations to try and build struggles against these wars and against imperialist military alliances. And quite often in those movements, or in some of the international solidarity movements, there's a lot of common ground, and this is a positive thing. But we have a long way to go.
Okay. Next question comes from Willie, and he asks, let's imagine you had a magic wand with which you can pass one policy into law. Which would it be?
Wow.
If you want some time for that one, that's all right.
Well, the problem is sometimes you can pass a policy that, theoretically anyway, that would make everything better, but it has other consequences down the road. I guess if we could pass a law saying that every person in Canada would have, not just the theoretical right, but the practical right to a decent place to live, to end homelessness. That would be, to me, the most immediate thing that could be done to lift a lot of people out of really desperate situations and make their lives better right now. And this is an issue where over my lifetime I've seen things go from bad to incredibly awful. So that's one that I would pick if we're going to say, what law would you pass right now? It would be to give everyone a place to live. Okay,
quite noble. Our next question comes from Office Max, and she asks, how did you get involved with the ideology, and do you think there's any underrated historical communist figures? So we'll do the first one, and then when you finished answering that, we'll move into the second part of that. So
underrated. Well, there's some historical communist figures we don't hear nearly enough about. One of my favorites would be Elizabeth Gurley Flynn from the United States, who was, one of the original IWW organizers. She was one of the key people fighting to defend Sacco and Vanzetti, and later on in life became leading member of the U.S. Communist Party. Went to jail for her beliefs. To me, she's one of those people that is sometimes a bit overlooked. I think partly because of her gender. Women don't get the kind of recognition that they need in terms of their contribution to the communist movement. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
The other part was, how did you get involved with communism and the ideology itself?
Well, I grew up actually in a family which was, Catholic and, mildly conservative during the 1960s, but we were, working class folks and quite poor. My father lost his job as a railway worker due to tech change, which was a thing 60 years ago, just like it is today. And I gradually became more and more dissatisfied with the whole idea of religion, with the whole idea of capitalism, which was, just really screwing me and my family. And the way it went was kind of like this. I was always an avid reader of newspapers, even though I lived in a very remote rural area. And when I was in high school, I started realizing the newspapers that were delivered to our house every day, they absolutely hated the Soviet Union. Told us constantly how awful it was. And I began to think, if the people that are oppressing me and my family and, the people in our area, if they all think the Soviet Union is so awful, there's got to be something good about it. So I started looking around in the library at school for anything I could find about Marxism and Russia. And I was drawn to what I thought were the accomplishments of the Soviet Union. I was drawn to Marxist ideology. I finally was able, with the help of a progressive-minded chemistry teacher, I got a copy of the Communist Manifesto, and it was like the light turning on, explaining the world I lived in, and I thought, wow. And then there was one particular incident that sort of cemented me along that path, and that was the shooting of the students at Kent State in May of 1970. And I saw the news coverage of that, and it immediately hit me. They're shooting down people like me for the things that I believe. So I said, I want to be with the people that are serious about changing this world. And I started looking for the Communist Party. It took me a little while to find it, but here I am.
Excellent. Okay. Our next question comes from Willie, and he asks, how would Canada, under the CPC, handle this pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't see ourselves as forming a government, a majority communist government, or anything like that. We think it's much more likely that we'll be part of the left progressive coalition, including our party. And a coalition like that, we would advocate a number of things, much broader testing, contact tracing. We support, the use of masks, physical distancing, hand washing, all the practical things that need to be done to handle a pandemic. And no matter what kind of historical situation you're in, no matter what kind of society, no matter what time period, there are certain things that human beings can do to minimize the impact of a pandemic of this type. We also think that the vaccines that are developed have to be made available free of charge, that the areas of the world that can least afford the vaccines need to be given the highest priority. We support a scientific approach to dealing with this crisis, and we are against those who are trying to play on it for politics, or those who are advocating, various conspiracy theories around this situation. So, our approach is very practical. On the economic recovery side, we are among those who are advocating much stronger levels of government support for working class people and small businesses that are being hit by this crisis. Canada has given some level of income support for people who've been laid off, people who are unemployed, but it needs to be much more and for a longer period of time. Small businesses in particular need a lot more help to ensure that they can keep going, keep their employees on staff. There's a lot of things on the economic and social side that are, much more needs to be done just to help people survive this extremely difficult time. And it's, getting worse here in Canada like it is in some other countries. Hello?
Oh, sorry about that. I didn't realize I was muted. My bad.
Okay.
Our next question comes from Gourmet Slim, and he asks, do you find there is a difference between academics who adopt leftist views compared to those who adopt those views through lived experience?
That's an interesting question. There's not a lot of academics in the Communist Party of Canada. There's some. We've had over the years, a lot of people come from university backgrounds who join, stay in our party for a while, then drop out. It's not an easy thing to be in academia and to be known as a member of the Communist Party of Canada. There's a lot of pressure put on against academics. Most of the academics in our party are really solid people, really strongly committed to Marxist ideology. They have a lot to offer. And it's, in my experience, a lot of them are people who came to academia from working class origins. And you manage to get to university, get degrees in, philosophy or labor history, whatever. So they don't tend to be people who are completely abstracted from real life. They're people who, they got to the point they're at from a certain starting point in life, which often was from the working class. We all know, I would think anyway, that people who are, born and raised in working class families and remain in them tend to bring, certain experiences in terms of the kind of poverty that they've lived in, the type of jobs that they've had, and this, molds and shapes how we look at the world. And once people have been in academic positions for a long time, that can have an impact on the way that they think. But I guess just to wrap up my answer to this question, a lot of people in the sort of university sphere are attracted to radical ideas, but are perhaps less likely to stick with it, from what I've seen.
Yeah, I can guess the lived experience probably has a higher chance of sticking with you.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Lil Bill, and please forgive me if I butcher this because I'm not Canadian. But he asks, what impacts do you see the Figueroa case having on modern day Canadian politics, and did it benefit the Communist Party in the long run?
Yeah, Figueroa case is it's named after Miguel Figueroa, as one of the leaders of our party. And he was the leader during the period of time in the 90s and early 2000s when our case against the Canadian Election Act went through the courts. What this involved in Canada since the 1970s, we have a system where federal political parties are either registered or unregistered. If you're a registered party, that means your candidates can have their political affiliation on the ballot. If you're not registered, you can only nominate people as individuals. Being a registered party comes with certain benefits besides having the name on the ballot. For example, if somebody makes a donation to a registered party, they get a tax credit for it. It can be 75% or 50%, whatever, it varies. So this is a good incentive for people to donate to a party like ours. If somebody gives the Communist Party $400, they get a $300 tax credit for it. So in 1993, the federal government at the time passed amendments to the Election Act, which made it very difficult for parties like ours to remain registered. We were deregistered for a period of about 8 years. Essentially, it had to do with the number of candidates you're required to run to gain and keep your registered status. We finally recovered our registered status by running 50 candidates in an election, which was an enormous effort. But we also shortly after that won the legal case, the Figueroa case. A federal judge ruled that you did not need to run 50 candidates. You could gain registered status by running 2 candidates in an election. And that also had an impact on things like the election deposit, which every candidate is required to put down, and how much time it takes to return that deposit. And in those days, it was $1,000. So for the number of candidates we ran at that particular time, to run 50 candidates, you had to put up $50,000 worth of deposits and wait close to a year to get your money back. So these were, very immediate, tangible gains that we won as a result of our efforts, including the Figueroa case. And it was a big benefit for every other small political party in this country. There are usually at any given time 14, 15, up to 20 small registered parties who were able to get on the ballot and take advantage of the tax credit system, get their views into the political debates during elections. And we're quite proud. It was our party that won that victory. We had very little help. And it really expanded the realm of electoral democracy in a big way in this country. Not that that's the be all and end all of revolutionary politics, but democratic freedom is an important value in its own right.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Our next question comes from MU57Y, and he asks, how would you define freedom and/or liberty?
Well, that's a pretty huge question. I would say, from a very practical working class standpoint, as someone who comes from a very low income background, freedom is the ability to do the kinds of things you really want to do without fear of being homeless and hungry and unemployed. If that's your situation in life, you don't really have the freedom, to travel, to study the things you might want to study, to participate in cultural activities that you might want. So freedom is at the heart of it a material matter, not just a sort of philosophical abstract matter. Liberty, well, I guess that's related to freedom. Liberty, I guess, has the connotation of being able to express one's views freely without fear of retribution or repression. And that's, we have in Canada the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees certain rights, freedoms, liberties, which can only be restricted for what it considers to be extremely serious reasons. In reality, of course, it's a little different. But we are, as communists, we have a view of the world that we want to see a future society in which everyone has the standard of living that's necessary to be able to devote their time to intellectual, cultural pursuits, whatever things interest them. This would be an ideal kind of society. So I'm not sure if that's a very satisfactory answer, but that's how we see it.
Good. No, it's really good. Our next question comes from Sushi, and broadly speaking, what do you think of syndicalism?
Well, it's certainly an advance over complete disorganization for the working class. Syndicalism historically comes out of the early attempts by workers to organize themselves in a way to resist the attempts of the bosses to cut wages and impose harsher working conditions and longer hours and so forth. Syndicalism, if it means working class organization without any political component, in our view, this falls short of what's really needed for revolutionary change in society. It's perfectly possible for workers, even without a union, to organize in ways that can push back against the bosses. You can do all sorts of things in a workplace to make it clear to an employer that they need to improve the situation of the employees. Otherwise, there's going to be dire consequences for the business. And syndicalism is it comes out of that history. But communists think the historical experience of the working class is such that political change is also a necessary part of the class struggle. We look at the class struggle as being made up of the economic struggle, the political, and the theoretical. Syndicalism tends to limit itself to the first one, just the economic struggle. Organizations, the IWW in their early history were heavily influenced by syndicalist ideas. And these groups made tremendous contributions to the working class movements of the times. We just don't think it's adequate for the situation that workers face today.
Mm-hmm. So this one could warrant quite a funny response, but Willie asks, what would you tell a Trump supporter if you were only able to say one sentence to them?
I tried to do that last Saturday. I ran across one in downtown Vancouver waving a big Trump flag. And I said to this person, can you tell me one reason why you support Trump? Because I was curious, I really would like to know. And this person said, I support Trump because everything he does is the greatest. I said, well, could you be a bit more specific? Everything he does is great. And I sort of had this back and forth for a couple of minutes, just trying to get a straight answer. Well, that's obviously anecdotal and not a particularly serious answer. We do have Trump supporters here in Canada, and I've occasionally had discussions with some of them, but there tends to be, in my experience, two types of Trump supporters. The ones who are convinced that he's going to bring tremendous economic gains for the population, if only he's allowed to do whatever he wants. And the other ones are, frankly, cult worshippers. And you can't have a serious discussion with the latter.
No, it seems to be quite tiring. Our next question also comes from Willie, and he asks, what is your view on the People's Republic of China? I think we answered that earlier, actually. So the second half of his question is, what is your view on North Korea?
North Korea is also a country that it's a socialist country. The productive wealth of the society is owned collectively by the population. Political power is held, not by a private capitalist class. It's held by the people. It's a society which, it evolves out of a very distinct history, set of circumstances, historic political culture. And it's a political culture that's not always easy for North Americans to relate to. any society which is building socialism after centuries of being organized on the basis of, feudalism, landlord domination of peasants, and so on, it will have a different tone to it, shall we say, than a society which has been overwhelmingly working class through the last several centuries. So, we stand in solidarity with the DPRK. We certainly support their resistance against the United States imperialism. We support their proposals to reunite the Korean Peninsula and let the Korean people themselves determine their future. We think the United States and its allies should completely remove themselves from the entire region. This would create better conditions for North Korea to build its economy, to improve people's living standards, to live a much more open and free kind of life. In our limited experience of our members traveling to North Korea, we think the picture that's painted here in the West is a pretty crude caricature. Obviously, there's things that we would take for granted here that people in that society don't have. But that's not a reason to look down on their society. It's certainly, the type of socialism that they have in North Korea is not what we would have here in Canada. But these are two wildly different countries in terms of demographics, history, cultures, and so forth. And we are not interested in saying that our way is better than their way.
Mm-hmm. So this next question actually comes from myself, and I'd be really interested to know, do you think that communism can only be achieved as an international revolution, or do you think it will be able to function in just one or a few nations?
I'm not really in the business of making predictions. The last time I made a serious prediction was in 2016 when I lost $50 on the U.S. election. And I said, I am not going to make predictions about the future no more. But your question is a serious one and much more relevant for people who want to change the world. I would answer it this way. People ask this all the time about Canada. Could you have a communist revolution in Canada if the United States was still imperialist? And we say it would be pretty difficult. It would be pretty difficult given the extent of U.S. economic domination of this country, having the U.S. military right on our doorstep and so on. On the other hand, it's hard to conceive of a revolutionary situation emerging in Canada unless something similar was happening in the United States, because these things are, they're reflective of the stage of history of capitalist countries in general. When there's, big surges towards the left in a few leading capitalist countries, it tends to be happening in the others as well. It would be very hard to have revolutions in one or two major capitalist countries or even minor capitalist countries, as long as the rest of them were still locked into the same situation of imperialist military alliances, various other forms of capitalist domination. Not impossible. The Soviet Union was able to build socialism pretty much by itself, but that was at a time in history when, it was a big chunk of the world's land base and population. It was more difficult for imperialism to penetrate into that society and overthrow it. These days, it's U.S. imperialism in particular has so many ways of intervening in other countries. It does seem to us that more and more it will be necessary to have broader revolutionary actions happening in a number of countries to weaken the ability of imperialism to overthrow their attempts to build socialism.
Interesting. This next question comes from Office Max, and she asks, do you believe the election of Joe Biden and so-called hyperliberalism has destroyed the resurgence of leftism?
Oh, gosh, absolutely not. Of course, we would be naive to sort of jump on the Biden bandwagon and say, this is the only way forward for democracy and progress in the United States. We would answer the only way forward in the immediate future is to stop the Trump fascist machine. Absolutely. I can't see how you could move in a left direction without defeating Trumpism. Electing Biden, assuming that he's going to take office in a couple of months, this does leave the path more open for left organizations to organize, mobilize, win broader support. I think it will become clear to a lot of the 75 million people that voted for Biden that the institutions that exist in the United States, the presidency and the Democratic Party and so on, these are not going to be able to create serious change. They are not going to be able to live up to even the limited promises that they've made so far. And it's up to people on the left to push for real change, to build the kinds of organizations that are capable of doing that, to strengthen some of the organizations and movements that were critical in this electoral defeat for Donald Trump, to make those the forces that are really in a position to change U.S. society, rather than simply assuming that the Democratic Party is going to be able to do it. Even if Bernie Sanders had been the candidate, that would have been a naive point of view. But we are not interested in dumping on the people who worked so hard to get rid of Trump. Even those liberals who we think are rather naive in their outlook, this was a historic accomplishment. We salute the efforts that were made to do this, but the work is only beginning.
Excellent. Okay, so our next question comes from Thinking Machine, and they ask, what specific differences constitute the line between the end stage of communism and anarchy?
That's another one that's a long ways in the future. We often say to anarchists when we're having discussions is, we are just as much in favor as you are of ending all state repression of any kind. When we have discussions around things like defunding the police or abolishing the police, our view is absolutely the police should be abolished. The whole capitalist state should be abolished, because it's, in one way or another, every element of it is a facet of repression of the working class. And that includes, the schools, the educational system, the prisons, the police, the bureaucracy, all of it in one form or another is intended to maintain the rule of one class over another. And even when you transition into socialism, this still involves having a state apparatus which at its heart is intended to maintain political power of one part of society. The overwhelming majority of society, against the the small part which wants to return to exploitation and oppression. But nevertheless, even under socialism, the state is a tool for one part of society to govern others or maintain political control. And this always, it always means that there's a possibility of misuse of authority and power, abuse of authority. And our goal, quite frankly, is to help create the conditions where that becomes impossible. And I think most anarchists would agree with that goal. They might express it a little differently, I don't know. But, we do share that common aim. And to the extent that allows communists and anarchists and other socialists to work together on certain things, that's a positive thing. The tactics of how you get there, of course, are different. We don't agree with those who say the main instrument of capitalist rule is the police. No, it's not our view. But we certainly do cooperate with those who are working to reduce the scale and power of the police, the prisons, the rest of the repressive capitalist apparatus. And how long will it take to get there? What will that future society look like? I'm not going to predict.
So we're almost coming to the end. We've got a few more questions.
Sure.
So the next one comes from Hazem, and they ask, what are your thoughts, broadly speaking, on social democracy?
I was a social democrat for a little while when I was young and innocent. When the leader of the NDP, and back in 1972, I'd been a member of that party for a year or two, when he said that they were not a socialist party, I said, fine. I took my NDP card out of my wallet and ripped it up and threw it away and joined the Communist Party, which I had found at that time. But this is not a subjective question for me. There are a lot of great friends of mine who are social democrats, NDPers, or members of other social democratic organizations and parties, and many of them are doing incredible work to try and deal with the abuses and horrors of the society that we live in. And I work with them in different movements around particular issues, but they are inevitably limited in the scope of what they're trying to achieve by the idea that somehow you can create a lasting, better society within the framework of capitalism. Mm-hmm. I find that idea just, it doesn't make sense to me. It never has. As long as the economic base of society is the exploitation of one human being by another, you're going to be really limited in what you can achieve. And, I'm sorry, social democrat friends, you're just wrong on that one. There's lots more I could say too. I mean, but that's what it boils down to.
Yeah. So we've got two more questions left, if that's all right with you. Sure. Our next one comes from Captain Tan, and they ask, do you have any broad opinions or thoughts on Professor Noam Chomsky?
Well, I think Chomsky has done the world a favor by forcing us all to think about how we think about things. He's written a lot of really valuable material to make people expand their intellectual framework, to realize that a lot of what we're told as the perceived wisdom that everybody should believe is in fact quite the opposite. on the big scale of things, he's an important historical figure on the left, who's done some very useful things. On the particulars, there are many things that we would disagree with Chomsky about, and especially what is it we're trying to do. I guess he would be in the general category of people who are opposed to capitalism for one reason or another, and almost always for very good reasons. But we say it's not good enough to oppose capitalism. If you want a different kind of society, a better society in the end, you have to be for some kind of socialist alternative. And Professor Chomsky has never really been very good at helping people to begin mobilizing around real socialist change. So that's a simplistic way of looking at it. But
okay. So we have the final question here, and it comes from Willie, and it's quite a spicy one. He asks, do you support a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict?
We support whatever solution the Palestinian people want. We're in favor of national self-determination of oppressed peoples, and the Palestinians are certainly in that category. Similarly, here in Canada, our party proposes solutions to the national oppression of peoples within this country by saying it would ideally be done within the framework of one national state set up in different ways to end national oppression. But if the people of Quebec determine that they want their own state, we will go to the wall to defend their right to have it. If the Acadians want their own state, we will support that. If the Haida people on the West Coast want their own state, we would support that too. That's a principle for us. In the case of Palestine, if historically the Palestinian people through the PLO expressed their view that they wanted a two-state solution. So that was historically the position of the Communist Party of Canada. That seemed to us for decades as the most immediate practical way for them to achieve a real meaningful independence, meaningful control over their own lives and their own society. But there are, ongoing discussions among the Palestinian people about how to deal with their oppression by Israeli Zionism, and there's, certainly some merit to the argument that the more Israel makes it impossible to have a real useful two-state solution, the more they are forced to consider other options. If the Palestinian people, through their organizations, arrive at the conclusion that they want some other form of solution, then we will extend our solidarity to them. There are people who will say that has already happened. I'm not so convinced. I think there's still a very lively debate among the Palestinian people over what kind of solution they think is necessary and practical at this point.
Excellent. Okay. So I believe that was the last question. So I want to say thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it. Do you have any closing statements you'd like to add?
Well, I guess we are at the point in human history where we're running out of time to save this planet. Capitalism, if it's not replaced with a socialist form of society, is going to make this planet impossible to live on within 20, 30 years. And this is why a lot of people are looking at socialist solutions, communist ideas. And this is a really great thing. I hope the people that are listening can find a way to turn their ideas into practical politics. I said a couple times I'm a very practical person. It really doesn't do you much good to simply discuss things, in chat rooms or with a few friends. You got to jump into politics, get into the material reality of trying to change the world by working with other human beings. And I encourage everybody who's listening here to do that. It's not easy. It brings a lot of heartbreak, but it also has the potential to save human civilization. So let's go for it.
100%. Yeah, this has been really insightful. So thank you very much for coming on once again. And thanking all the viewers for asking the questions tonight. They were all really good. So yeah, thank you for coming on. It was really good.
Okay, thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.